So what if trying to improve yourself, like reading all the right books, practicing mindfulness, building up your willpower, is actually just a complete waste of time if your ZIP code happens to be wrong?
Right. Yeah, it goes against everything we're taught.
Exactly. I mean, we love that whole narrative of the unstoppable individual spirit, right? We like to think that if you are just resilient enough, you can bloom anywhere, pushing your roots right through the concrete.
The classic underdog story.
Yeah, but the perspective we're exploring today looks at that popular narrative and, well, fundamentally rejects it. It argues that you are not some unstoppable force of nature. You are a highly sensitive organism, and your surrounding environment will absolutely and entirely dictate what you become.
It's a pretty radical shift in thinking.
It really is.
Yeah.
So, welcome to today's deep dive. We are unpacking a translated 2017 essay titled The Environment Helps to Create Celestial Beings and Buddhas, and it's written by Sufeng.
And, you know, it is a striking, really uncompromising piece of philosophical writing. The core thesis here is that achieving the ultimate state of spiritual elevation, whether that means becoming a celestial being, a Buddha, or just, reaching your absolute highest potential, is fundamentally impossible if you only focus on your internal state.
You can't just meditate your way out of a bad situation.
Exactly. The author argues that, yes, a cultivated soul garden is necessary, but it is rendered completely useless without the precise physical living environment to support it.
The physical environment isn't just an influence, it is the absolute baseline. Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission today is to really test the boundaries of this highly specific argument.
And we should probably add a quick note for you listening.
Yeah, definitely.
This text takes some incredibly aggressive, controversial stances on everyday life, particularly regarding marriage, family, and the working class.
Right. And obviously, we are not endorsing these viewpoints or taking any political or social sides here. We're just impartially unpacking the author's fascinating, extreme logical framework to see what we can learn from it.
To properly evaluate the author's blueprint for spiritual ascension, we really have to start where he starts, which is entirely outside the realm of spirituality.
Right. He goes straight to history and geography.
He builds his case by establishing a baseline premise, which is that the environment fundamentally overrides personal traits and agency across all aspects of human existence, starting with history.
Yeah, he looks at that old concept that troubled times create heroes, and he specifically focuses on World War II.
Hmm.
The text provides this heavy-hitting roster of military figures. He lists, Marshal Zhukov of the Soviet Union, Britain's General Montgomery, America's Eisenhower, Marshall, and Nimitz.
And Yamamoto for Japan?
Yeah, Yamamoto.
Yeah.
And Germany's Manstein and Kesselring. And instead of treating these men as innate geniuses who just shaped their era, the author completely flips the causality.
Because the mechanism he's describing here is environmental activation.
Activation, right.
The argument is that the specific, horrific crucible of global warfare was literally the only mechanism capable of producing those historical giants.
Without that exact conflict.
It would have been nobodies. The author asserts they would have just been submerged in ordinary mortal life. Their latent potential was entirely irrelevant without the environmental trigger. The environment created the general. The general did not create the environment.
Wow. And he applies that exact same rigid causality to our physical bodies, bringing it right down to regional diets.
Yeah, the food examples are really interesting.
They are. He points out that people from Shaanxi love vinegar, Cantonese people prefer sweets, and those in Hunan and Sichuan lean heavily into spicy food. And rather than chalking this up to, cultural tradition or just genetic quirks, he insists it is a direct biological mandate from the geography itself.
And we see his logic when he traces the causal chain of migration. The text notes that if someone with absolutely no taste for vinegar moves to Aksu in Xinjiang,
the environment changes them.
Exactly. The environmental conditions will physically alter their palate until they actually crave it. And conversely, if a vinegar-loving individual from Shaanxi moves across the world to Canada, the environmental mandate shifts.
And they just lose the taste for it.
Over time, yeah, their body simply loses the taste for it. The geography dictates the biology.
Which leads him to make some incredibly bold claims about physical health and disease.
Yes, the medical claims.
He essentially argues for geographic cures. He says that spending time in Vanuatu will make high blood pressure disappear. Moving to a desert environment will cure rheumatoid arthritis, and living in Harar, Zimbabwe, will greatly reduce asthma. And I have to admit, reading the section, it felt remarkably like playing a video game.
What do you mean? Like an RPG?
Yeah, exactly like an RPG, where
Yeah.
your character is, locked out of certain health regeneration abilities unless you physically walk them over to the desert biome or the island biome.
Right.
And I really struggle with the absolute nature of this claim. Like, is it really just the environment? If literally anyone with severe arthritis walked into the desert, would the friction in their joints just magically vanish? Or does personal physiology still have to play a dominant role at some point? Seems to just ignore the complexity of the human body.
Well, let's challenge the literalism of those medical claims for a moment and look at the underlying rhetorical strategy.
Okay.
Because the author is not necessarily trying to write a peer-reviewed medical journal here. He is constructing a philosophical syllogism. He's using these highly tangible physical examples, global warfare, regional palette shifts, disease management, to build an airtight logical trap for a much larger abstract argument.
So he's essentially establishing a pattern of dominance.
Precisely. Think about it. If you can see that your geographical environment dictates the chemical cravings of your palate, whether your body experiences illness or health, and whether a person becomes a legendary historical figure.
Or just an unknown civilian.
Right. If you agree with all that, then logically, you are forced to accept that your environment exercises that same total dominance over the state of your soul. He anchors the mystical concept of enlightenment to the undeniable reality of geography.
It is a brilliant setup, honestly. He grounds you in the mundane reality of vinegar and historical generals so that when he pivots to the metaphysical, you're already primed to accept his terms.
And this is where the text becomes incredibly combative.
Oh, yeah. Because once he establishes that the environment dictates the outcome, he turns his sights on identifying the specific environments that guarantee absolute spiritual failure.
This is where the text launches its sweeping indictment of modern conventional life. The author argues that the standard environments we occupy, specifically marriage and the family unit, structurally lack the conditions necessary for any form of spiritual ascension.
And he doesn't just say it's difficult, he declares it categorically impossible for people living in married families to become celestials or Buddhas.
He uses a pretty funny historical anecdote to illustrate this.
The Thomas Edison one, yes. He uses this somewhat ridiculous but really effective anecdote about the American inventor. Apparently, Edison once sat on a chicken egg, attempting to hatch it using his own body heat.
And the absurdity of that image is exactly the point. Edison possessed immense willpower, right? Intent, intellect. But the result was failure.
Utter failure.
Why? Because the environmental conditions required to hatch a chick cannot be willed into existence by a human, no matter how determined they are.
Willpower is completely irrelevant if you aren't a mother hen with the correct thermodynamic output.
Exactly.
He uses another analogy about transplanting delicate plants from the mild climate of Yunnan to the freezing Northeast. They die off instantly, not because the plant is weak, but because it is biologically incompatible with the climate.
Which leads to his most striking, albeit abrasive, metaphor. He compares the family unit to a garbage dump.
It is a highly provocative comparison to make.
Very. He states that marriage and family are the environments where laymen and mortals are born. A garbage dump, by its very nature, breeds mosquitoes and flies.
Right, it does not possess the environmental conditions to breed bees.
And he follows this up with a blunt message to anyone trying to achieve spiritual enlightenment while navigating family life. He says, stop dreaming. If you can become a celestial or Buddha, a donkey can fly a plane.
A donkey can fly a plane? I mean, wow. But the author broadens this forbidden zone far beyond just the family, right?
He does. He applies the exact same structural critique to the workplace and to social hierarchy. Bosses who run companies, government officials managing bureaucracy, the wealthy maintaining their assets, they are all placed in the same doomed category.
Because they are surrounded by constant low-level friction. The text notes that these wealthy or powerful individuals have so many annoying, mundane things to worry about every single day that they are lucky if they don't inadvertently cultivate themselves into devils.
Which is an intense way to frame it.
Forget about reaching a higher state of consciousness. You're lucky if the stress of your job doesn't literally turn you into a demon. But here's where it gets really interesting, because I want to introduce some pushback here.
Oh, for it.
This philosophy feels akin to saying, you can't get into peak physical shape if you happen to work in a bakery.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Right. Like, yes, the environment is full of distractions and temptations, and yes, it requires more discipline. But isn't the ultimate test of a so-called Buddha the very ability to maintain inner peace amidst the chaos of reality.
The lotus flower blooming in the mud.
Exactly. If you are a parent soothing a screaming toddler or a manager navigating a massive supply chain crisis, and you can still find spiritual centering in that moment, isn't that a far higher achievement than simply hiding on a mountain? Why is retreating from the world framed as the only valid path?
That is the standard modern interpretation of resilience, absolutely. But it conflicts directly with the mechanics of the author's philosophy.
How so?
Well, this framework is not about testing your endurance against temptation. The underlying mechanism here is cognitive load.
Cognitive load, like the processing power on a computer?
Think of it exactly like RAM. Spiritual ascension, in this framework, is a computationally intensive task. It requires 100% of your systemic resources.
Oh, wow, okay.
The daily friction of maintaining a certain level of wealth, navigating corporate bureaucracy, managing employees, or fulfilling complex family obligations, all of those tasks require processing power.
They're running in the background.
Exactly. They literally crowd out the mental bandwidth required to achieve and maintain an advanced spiritual state. You cannot run the Celestial Being software if 90% of your cognitive RAM is dedicated to paying a mortgage, fixing a leaky roof, and responding to emails. The author is arguing for absolute systemic efficiency.
Wow, okay, that reframes the entire concept. It isn't about being weak or fleeing from a challenge. It's about ruthlessly reallocating your resources.
Precisely.
So if everyday life, marriage, family, work, and wealth is the garbage dump that breeds mosquitoes because it eats up all your RAM, what does the optimal bee environment actually look like?
Well, the author doesn't just critique society. He provides a highly detailed master plan for the alternative.
He does, and the way he introduces this blueprint is fascinating. He claims to have spent over 10 years writing more than 3,000 articles, which totals around 10 million words of philosophical exploration.
10 million words.
Yeah. Yet he boils all of that immense effort down to a single overarching concept. There is a quote from the text that perfectly captures this shift. He says, "The core of truth is in one sentence, while falsehoods are spread by millions of books."
It's quite the realization after a decade of writing.
Seriously, he spent a decade producing millions of words only to realize the truth was essentially an 8-point checklist.
And the conditions of this perfect celestial environment are incredibly strict.
Let's look at the physical baseline first. Condition 1 dictates there can be absolutely no worry regarding basic needs. Food, clothing, housing, life, and death must be entirely secured.
And Condition 3 supports that physical baseline, demanding a beautiful environment and consistently good weather.
Sounds nice so far.
It does. But the blueprint quickly shifts from physical security to psychological and social insulation. Condition 2 demands zero stress, no restraint, no anxiety, no responsibility, and no obligations of any kind.
Wow, zero responsibility. Condition 4 focuses on the freedom to act entirely by one's own nature without any barriers or societal shackles.
Condition 5 builds on that, requiring ample time for relaxation, the presence of playmates, and beautiful scenery to engage with.
Playmates and scenery. Okay, condition 6 establishes an absolute vacuum of threat. There must be no risk, no crisis, and complete quiet, devoid of noise.
And the final two conditions are perhaps the most radical, as they address the social structure. Condition 7 strictly prohibits human relationships, specifically targeting reciprocal courtesy calls.
Wait, meaning what?
This means you owe no one anything, and no one owes you anything. No transactional social bonds.
That's intense.
And finally, Condition 8 demands an absence of idol worship and administrative control. There are no bosses, no government orders, and not even a deity to dictate your actions.
I mean, when you lay out those 8 points, it suddenly makes perfect sense why famous historical monasteries and Taoist temples were built where they were.
Yes, the author highlights this geographical phenomenon.
Right, pointing out that these sites are always located in the most scenic, remote places, designed with the best feng shui, completely isolated from human crowds.
The founders of those institutions weren't just looking for a pleasant view, they were engineering an environmental technology. A Taoist temple isn't just a building, it is a meticulously constructed mechanism designed to meet those exact 8 conditions, eliminating all external friction so the inhabitants can dedicate 100% of their cognitive load to cultivation.
But looking critically at this 8-point blueprint, it sounds exactly like an all-inclusive luxury resort on a private island, just with a strict ban on networking.
It really does.
You have perfect weather, playmates, zero responsibilities, all your meals provided, and no noise. If you face absolutely no risks and you are entirely insulated from human struggle and reciprocal relationships, aren't you essentially living in a vacuum?
That's a fair point.
How can anyone claim to achieve a higher state of existence if they are actively refusing to engage with the reality of the world? It sounds less like spiritual enlightenment and more like a permanent, consequence-free vacation.
This raises an important question, and that tension is the central challenge of the essay. The extreme emphasis on creating a frictionless vacuum suggests that spiritual elevation is an incredibly fragile, energy-intensive process.
Like the plant analogy from earlier.
Going back to the analogy of the delicate Yunnan plant, exactly. It requires a perfectly controlled greenhouse because the sheer energy needed to bloom is immense. Any energy expended on engaging with the world, navigating social dynamics, managing stress, mitigating risk, is energy that is permanently lost to the process of spiritual cultivation.
So the goal is to stop the energy leaks entirely.
Yes. But the author introduces a vital, nuanced dichotomy at the very end of his argument. He states that while the spiritual environment, the internal soul garden, must be meticulously created by the individual, the physical living environment, this perfect, stress-free, 8-point utopia, must be created collectively.
Must be created collectively. That is a massive caveat.
It changes everything.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, navigating the real world today? Because, even if you have absolutely no intention of abandoning your career or your family to seek out a secluded mountain temple, Zhufeng's essay functions as a highly effective thought experiment.
It really demands that we critically examine the spaces we inhabit and the structures we build our lives around.
Exactly. It forces you to audit the friction in your own environment. Are the daily stresses of your environment acting as a fundamental barrier to your own personal goals?
Like the RAM we were talking about.
Yeah. If you are sitting in a chaotic, high-stress office, desperately trying to produce brilliant, focused, creative work, you might just be Edison trying to hatch that egg. You have all the willpower and intent in the world, but your environment simply will not provide the conditions for that idea to hatch.
We have to respect the physical and social forces acting upon us. But, I want to leave you with a final lingering paradox from the text to consider.
Ooh, let's hear it.
The author concludes by stating that this perfect living environment must be created collectively. It requires a coordinated group effort to build and sustain a beautiful, resource-rich sanctuary where all basic needs are met.
Right, farming, building, maintaining.
However, condition number 7 on his blueprint strictly requires no human relationships and explicitly bans any reciprocal obligations.
Oh, wow. That is a direct collision of ideas.
It begs the question, how can a group of people collectively build, manage, and sustain a functional community, ensuring food, housing, and absolute safety for everyone if they are utterly disconnected from social obligations to one another?
You can't.
Can collective creation actually exist in a vacuum devoid of reciprocal human relationships? Or is the perfect spiritual environment, as defined by this essay, a structural paradox that collapses on itself the moment you try to build it?
That is a phenomenal contradiction to unpack. How do you farm the food to guarantee everyone's basic needs if no one is allowed to have an obligation to harvest it? It forces you to question whether absolute freedom and collective survival can ever truly coexist.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is. To everyone listening, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Take a moment today to look around your own greenhouse. Think about how the environment you've built is shaping your potential, for better or worse. We'll catch you next time.